All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming along to another Transhumanist Australian meetup. My name is Peter Xing, and I'd like you to welcome to Future Factory. Thank you, Steve. Everything you see here is conscious of Steve's 12-year-old, and I'll tell you what, it does some amazing things. And today we've also got Christina here from Singularity U Australia Summit. So we'll be playing some of the videos. Interesting about the summit, we've got some flyers up here. There's more drinks and pizza at the back if you haven't already seen, but again, just a quick hands up if you've ever actually been to these Transhumanist meetups. Oh, great, thanks for coming back. And as anyone that hasn't, thank you very much for coming. Have you ever heard of transhumanism before this event? That's fantastic. So just a quick overview. Transhumanism is about three pillars there. Super longevity, how do we live longer and healthier? Super intelligence, how do we get smarter by using science and technology? And super well-being, how do we use technology to increase our well-being, future of energy and creating abundance for all, but also filling in those hierarchies of needs of Maslow. So today we have a very special couple of speakers. We've got James Ferguson from the Garvan, who's going to be talking about the genomic feature. So all these CRISPR gene editing, the whole genome sequencing, you'll be hearing more about that. And also we'll have Andrew Greig talking about the sci-fi future. Okay, how does sci-fi influence society and what that means on our collective narratives and imagination? So we've got some QR codes there. If you want to, if you're taking a photo, it'll come up automatically. If you want to connect with these two after the show, and you can see that James gets up to a few other things as well outside the government. And I've known him since the biofoundry days and the biohack Sid, where he's hacking away with Meow Ludo and the others, and he still is. So yeah, it's great to see him out here and doing that talk for us. And Andrew is at Intellify, doing a lot of machine learning consultancy, but his passion with being able to do a lot of these personal coaching and growth, as well as sci-fi, is going to be really coming out later today. So I couldn't help but actually go through some of my personal interests in sci-fi because, when I was reading Brave New World in high school, this is the future they were depicting. These babies growing out of the labs and how do you have society divided in all these different classes and engineering that for capitalism. And also Gattaca, essentially, you can have designer babies that dictate where you sit in society and whether your employer allows you to work on that basis. But also sci-fi can get a lot of the plot points wrong as well. For example, The Matrix, they turn everyone into a battery. This super intelligent AI have all the things you could use a human for. A human is used for a battery. So, a potato will give you more energy apparently. But that was sort of make it more mainstream. But maybe it was all just a simulation, and that's how you get around the plot error, right? And with Terminator, you have like these killer robots. Even though they're so intelligent, they can turn pure matter and energy into computation to decide to kill all the humans with these robots. So it doesn't quite make sense. And then in Rampage, this is where like CRISPR-Cas9 technology got showcased in pop culture for the first time, and they decided to turn a gorilla into some Hollywood blockbuster movie of King Kong, essentially, right, with the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And you're seeing also, but sci-fi is a great way to actually communicate these dangers about the future as well. So you see alternative facts from 1984 and George Orwell. We've got Donald Trump fake news. But I want to play to you one of the deep fakes that are out there. It's actually quite good these days. I'm just really impressed by how much advancements they've got since the past. But let me just play that again. This is Bill Hader. Do you guys know Bill Hader? He's from a TV show called Barry, a comedian. But I want to just play this because this is how a normal interview actually works. And you can see how they're transposing Arnold Schwarzenegger's face in the back of it. And you're going to see when he's talking, that's when they switch between the deepfake and the deepfake on and off. So when he's doing an impression, it's uncanny. It's like uncanny. Right?
Look up the Canary Reeves one. It's just come out.
It's ridiculous, right? And these days you just can't tell the difference. And so it's popping out more and more. So I guess, for people that don't do impressions, this actually really helps out with their impression. When And you've got big brothers watching you, 1984 as well, and China's social credit score, that's already happening. And but also you saw the Black Mirror episode where essentially there is a social credit score out there. And in the latest season, season 5, these 3 awesome episodes. Have you guys seen the latest season 5, right? This is over here. Alright, got striking vipers. Essentially you're simulated a world of Street Fighter, and you can actually feel everything that you can in the video world, and you might actually avoid your actual reality there. You've got Smithereens, that's talking about the dangers of social media and the addictions you have to your smartphones. And Rachel Jack and Ashley too, essentially copying a consciousness into a toy and exploiting musicians in the future. So this is some of the interesting things that I couldn't help myself putting in, but Andrew will go through in more detail. And what's really inspiring is that we talk about flying taxis and the future, flying cars, and it's actually got plans now in Melbourne because people already know what the Jetsons are all about, and they're actually going for it. Elon Musk paying tribute to the future of sci-fi around the Culture series, naming his drone ships essentially just read the instructions or of course I love you. These are all from the Culture series. So just seeing how these sci-fi actually inspires real world action. And of course, what really inspires future leaders is Singularity University. So Transhumanist Australia is proud to be a partner of that for the summit this year. It's going to be on October 22nd and 23rd. I'm just going to play a short video so you can actually have a quick look. And Christina's here as well. You can ask us some questions and some flyers at the front. Without further ado, the future is not about stress, rather it's constructive opportunity. Singularity Australia Summit, and check it out. We're going to be organising the Tech Hub as well, so playing some demos. We've got Tesla suit coming from London that you'll be able to try full body haptics. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we'll give a round of applause to James Ferguson.
This one? That? Use my voice.
Use your voice. That works.
Yep.
This one over here. There you go.
Take support.
Yeah. Hello.
Just go to the screen settings.
There it is. Got it. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, just play and mirror. Alright. Duplicate. Yeah.
Nice. Key
Changes.
changes. There we go. Alright. Another round of applause for James.
Okay. Hi everyone. So I'm James. I'm from the Garvan Institute of Medical Research, specifically in the Kinghorn Center for Clinical Genomics, which is a group of, I think it's 5 labs and we do everything from rare disease diagnostics to big data analytics and new genomic technologies. So I work in the genomic technologies branch, and we look at all the newest kind of things that are coming out, and try to use them, develop them, and make them kind of more mainstream for the general medical research field, as well as you guys. And I'll be talking about a technology that's really exciting, both because of its price point, as well as its usability, how quick it is, all this kind of stuff. It even works in specs. So I'll give you a quick little crash course in genomics so you kind of understand what the relevance of this is. So how many of you know much about DNA? If you know a lot, put your hand up. Okay, what about those that are kind of a bit fuzzy on the details? Put your hand up. Okay, great, this is gonna help you. Okay, so what is your genome, right? So you got a human, you got you. In you, you've got different types of tissue, right? Skin, brain, lungs. Welcome, guys. Skin, brain, your eyes, toenails, hair, all this kind of stuff. They're all made up of cells. In every cell, you've got a bunch of stuff in there. And these are the machinery that make them do things. Like your skin is like elastic, and like they can heal, and your brain does thinking, and your lungs help taking oxygen and send it around your bloodstream. But inside every one of those cells is a nucleus, and in that nucleus you have these chromosomes, and they're essentially just different packets of different sizes that inside contain DNA, and the DNA is made up of 4 nucleotides, adenosine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, and they pair together to create these structures, and it's essentially like a code which can encode things. So the fascinating thing about this is that you can have a skin cell or a neuron, yet the genome is 100% identical. So the same code giving you totally different types of cells, totally different types of actions. Now, how is this so? So you'll have your DNA like this, and along there you'll have these structures called genes. Now these make up about 2% of the genome, and there was a time where people used to call the rest of it junk DNA. We know better than that now. Most of it does something. It was just very hard to figure out what. So in a chromosome, you unravel it, you get the DNA, and what you have is RNA comes out of that DNA. It gets translated by a protein that goes and reads it. That gets turned into a protein, and proteins are like molecular machines. The specific letters in RNA, there's 3 letters will code for 1 amino acid. That gives you the order of amino acids. The order of amino acids turns it into the structure, and the structure dictates how it works. And these things can move, and they can go to cells and punch them open and explode them, or they can go and read DNA or duplicate DNA. They can go and modify it in different ways that give you genetic memory. This thing's called epigenetics, where you can turn on and off genes and all this kind of stuff based on your environment, and this is how we adapt to things. Very complicated, but the way that we get 2 of the same, so you have the same information creating 2 totally different cells, is you can have different genes getting expressed in different amounts. So this is showing that like in one gene might be massively expressed, while others might be lower. And then in a different gene, in a different cell type, you'll have another combination of gene expression. So to give you a little sense of scale of how big the genome actually is, you're all familiar with Tolstoy's War and Peace, that giant book that probably sat on your bookshelf. You never read it, but like you're like, I got this massive. How big is this book? So that has about 3 million letters in it, right? In that book. So to have the human genome in the representation of Tolstoy's books, the human genome has 3 billion letters in it. So that would mean you need 1,000 War and Peace books to represent the human genome. Now, if you stack all those on top of each other, that's the height of an 18-story building, right? And that's in every one of your cells, every single one. Now, a genetic disease, something that might give you muscular dystrophy, or something that might give you I don't know, change the color of your eyes, or help dictate your susceptibility to a particular medication, could be just one spelling error in those 1,000 books. Now, when we try to read these books, sorry it's a little bit small, but when we try to read these books, it's essentially what we do molecularly is we take those 18 stories of books, and then we tear every single page out, and then we rip those pages up into groups of 100 letters each or so. And then we, chuck it in the air and let it all fly around. And then it's people like me that come along and try and piece it all back together again to try and figure out what's going on. Because you only read each little bit at a time using the types of technology, and then you have to try and put it all back together again. And then when you do that, hope that no errors got introduced in that process to be able to identify that one spelling mistake. It's quite an effort. And you can't just do that on one cell or one genome, you end up doing it for thousands. So you do this process multiple times, so thousands of times, thousands of times, the data starts getting pretty big. So one complication of War and Peace is it's actually translated from Russian. So there's multiple English translations. So each one of you sitting here has a slightly different genome to everyone else. So how do you figure out which mistake is actually a mistake that causes disease, or it's just something that means you have to wear glasses, or something that changes the complexion of your face, or how high your eyes are, or something. These are things that people in the medical research space in genomics have to try and figure out what is a disease change from what we call an ideal genome, which is basically 10 white guys. So a complete human genome. But that's getting much better. When you compare your genome to our reference, when you have that change, how do you know that it's actually a disease causing change and not just one about that makes you who you are, or it's just something that does nothing? And this is a hard problem. So the evolution of the technology to read these genomes has evolved, and it's evolved much quicker than computing technology over the last years. So from the 1990s, it cost us $1 to $3 billion to sequence the first human genome. Then moving into the 2010s, we got down to $5,000 per genome in about 2 weeks. Now we can do it in about 1 to 2 days, and at a price point of about $1,000. And the latest companies are trying to push this to $100. So this is well within the reach of all of you here. And it's going handheld. Once you needed trucks, now you can carry it around. So the technology, this is where the massive evolving in this space is happening, was based on this thing called sequencing by synthesis. And the big player is called Illumina, and they're the big eye of Sauron. They're everywhere. They crunch you with the reagents and the money, and you better try and because there's no competition in the space, which has changed now. But essentially, you have an original bit of DNA, one of those little bits of the page from the Tolstoy, and then little bits of nucleotides that come up and match against it. And they have a little color bit, a little bit of fluorescent dot, and it will flash a different color for a different base. When you have multiple of these going all at once, you get this, and you get hundreds of millions of reads over a couple of days, and then you turn that into your genome. If you look at EBI, which is a big database in Europe, for the number of sequences, so stretches of DNA, and the number of bases, we're in the 11,520 trillion bases, which interestingly, I was talking to this about my boss, that's more bases than there are ants on Earth. So we're getting to a point where just the storage of this data is it's soon going to surpass every other bit of big data in the world is going to be genomics data. We're at number 3 at the moment, and our inflection of rise is higher than everything else. So it's only a matter of time until we take over. Ants. So with this, when we talk about CRISPR technology, as Peter was mentioning, this is a way to go in and change one base or a couple of bases. You can do things like add function, remove function, silence genes, turn them on and off. create new things and new species. There was a wonderful story. Are we recording this at the moment, by the way?
Sorry.
We are?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm not going to tell that story.
Turn it off.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's just
We'll talk to you in the break.
It just has proprietary stuff in it, so I'm not going to talk about it. But like there are people out there who, for example, the EU is terrified of GMOs, right? That you can't go and just modify something. It'll take you a couple of weeks. You do it. You test it. Cool. It gives you exactly the function you want, and off you go. So they're spending years doing selective breeding to get the exact same outcome. And I'm talking 15 years long to get the same outcome you could now achieve in a week. Like that's and this is that exponential change in gene technology, but how do you make sure that what you've done and what you've edited is actually real? Like it's done exactly what you want, and that there's no spurious changes that are going to cause a catastrophe. And that all comes down to sequencing technology. How do you have the Gattaca future where as you walk through a gate, you put your finger on the thing, it takes your blood and goes, yep, that's that person, you're allowed in here, and you go for access control. That comes down to, well, can you do real-time genomics? When it comes down to, if we all might get sick with the same disease, and they go to give us a medication, but all of us will respond differently. We'll have different side effects, we'll need different dosages. This doesn't just come down to weight. This also comes down to your genes. It dictates how you respond to different medications in different ways, and this helps with personalized treatment. And again, all that comes down to, can we read your DNA, can we understand these things? And matching data of phenotype, like what you look like, how you respond, with the changes in your genome. And we're going from this kind of understanding of what is humanity to what is you. What is your genome? It's very different to everyone else's. And understanding cancer and trying to figure out how to live forever, it's all going to come down to the genome, how to stop damage to the genome, how to make sure that your telomeres aren't getting ripped to shreds. There's been some fascinating stuff on that lately. So the future, big data from a time device. This is a picture I took recently in London at a conference called London Calling. And every dot on this map is a dot of a new kind of sequencing technology that's just come out. I say just come out, it's been around for 5-6 years, but it's only just coming to prime time now. And it is now the most ubiquitous sequencing technology in the world, and it works in space. And I'm just gonna play you. So remember the sequencing by synthesis. This is the new tech. Play. So this is called nanopore sequencing. And it's absolutely cool because it uses tiny nanopores to have DNA translocate through it. And in doing so, read the DNA. So rather than looking at blinking lights, it actually measures the DNA directly. So on the smallest device, you'll have 2048 different little nanopores. Each one is absolutely tiny. Each one is monumentally distances apart at that scale. You have this molecular protein which unzips the DNA, and that's like a molecular brake to push the DNA through the pore. And then you have these ions. These are like salt ions in the background solution that flow through the pore, and then you can measure current that comes out the other end. And this current then gets translated by machine learning to turn it into your ATCGs. Now the great thing about this is it's not just the ATCGs, there's more to your genome than just those letters. There's also tiny little modifications, little methyl groups that work in turning on and off genes. These are things that can turn, you can have the markers for a disease, but they don't get turned on until you actually have the environmental impact required to turn them on. This can read those things. And it works in space, which is, I think, the cool part of it. So when they go to Mars, that is going with it. It's already been, they work with NASA and all this kind of stuff. So the one on the right there is called a smidge ion, and it plugs into the bottom of the phone. Hasn't quite yet been released, but the price point should be something around $50 to $90. That's enough to test your salmon when you're at a Japanese restaurant and see if it's actually salmon or not, right there at the table. This is the brand new version of it. It's got a screen integrated into it. I can see this in doctor's offices where you could go and get a particular gene tested for. So it works like this. You've got a flow cell that's replaceable. It's got the little nanopore structures on it here. That's the membrane. It's really tiny, all powered by this acid, the most powerful, most sensitive ammeter in the world. And then when the molecules go through these pores, you have the ion current in the back, so that's an open pore. When something blocks it at different sizes, you get a different characteristic signal. And a real signal looks like this, and as it's going through like this. This would be one DNA strand, open pore, another DNA strand, open pore, and then these signals just represent the different types of bases as you go along the signal. And just to zoom in, this is kind of what it looks like. So this might not look like anything to you, but for me, that I look at these all day, like I can see this is the nanopore adapter, and then like I can essentially tell you what the base sequence of this is. Now, the evolution of this has mapped the AI world, like how we've developed how to read really crazy data that humans can't really understand unless you're crazy like me, and actually translate these signals into the ATCs and Gs. So starting with hidden Markov models, back a couple of years ago, that was kind of the state of the art, and then someone came along from the machine learning space and went, hey, what if we use recurrent neural networks and see how that goes? And that boosted the accuracy from about 75% accuracy to like about 85 to 90% accuracy, and that was a huge jump. Then someone went, well, what if we use this new long-term, short-term memory stuff? A big jump in the machine learning space. So there's like two kinds of RNNs, like layers. So then, and that was really good. Put us up to like 91, 92% at the highest level. And then a guy from Queensland came along and used the convolutional neural networks and connections temporal classifications to even make it even better. And with a modification of this, we can now get 95 plus accuracy for single reads of DNA. Now this is important because you don't want too many errors, because then you don't know which errors are real errors or which errors are from the technology. So then you map all the reads over each other, and you find the one little, like, it kind of gets rid of all the noise, and you get like the actual error. And this is like the curve of accuracy over time. There's all the different, as the technology kind of evolves. Now for price points per gigabase, so remember a billion in this case is a giga, right? So one human genome is 3 gigabases big. So if you want to sequence one human genome on their largest device, the Promethean, if you buy lots of their stuff, you get a discount. So that comes down to about, what's that, for 100 gigabases, 200 gigabases is $3. So if you divide that by 3, it's a few cents per human genome. That's kind of where we're at now, which is, I talk about, the genomics future, I don't have to talk about in 10 years, I can talk about now, because this is like science fiction almost. These machines exist. That's the Promethean, the most powerful sequencer in the world. It can produce 50 terabytes of data a day. So I have the Great Wall of Mass here, which is 864 terabytes of disk storage. That can hold 10 days of this data. And then I have to get rid of it all for the next 10 days. So there's a huge issue with storage and computation, and we're not there yet, actually. Computing needs to catch up. Genomics is taking over. And this is a really exciting one. This is a new ASIC chip they've designed, which is only about $1. And they can put 96 of them in this new device called the Pongle. It's a terrible name. But this will go in Path Labs, and you can replace all the molecular genetics tests. So $25 for that BRCA test that costs, what is it, like $1,020 now, Medicare rebated. So that's probably coming in the next two years. Now we've used this technology to sequence loads of stuff. Everything from like HIV to the Venus flytrap, German shepherd, dingo, blue bottle, funnel-web spider, huntsman spider, some single cell stuff. So like when you get a I'll talk about that in a minute. Single cell stuff, cell lines. This is like figuring out how to use this kind of technology on a whole range of things. Another thing about the technology that's different to everything else is it can do really long reads. So there's no real theoretical limit to how long one structured DNA can be sequenced. The other tech is limited to about 300 bases. That tiny little, like when you rip up all the pages of Tolstoy, you have a few hundred bases, that's what a sequence is. What Nanopore can do is read a whole page at a time, or even maybe whole chapters. So our lab was the first to get past the 1 megabase, so 1 million bases in one DNA strand. That made quite a lot of noise about the technology, but most of it sits around here, the 200,000, 100,000 mark. It depends how good at pipetting you are. So we published this paper called RageSeq. It means repertoire and gene expression sequencing. Essentially, you have a tumor that might be like this, and different cells have different DNA kind of signatures, and those signatures, like this, might need to get treated by a different type of cancer drug. Now, if you just give them one cancer drug, it'll kill that one type of cell, but then the other two types might live on and kill the patient. This is how a lot of people go into remission, and then it comes back and kills them. This is where it's kind of like natural selection. You give it like one thing, something survives, and then grows back and kills you. So with single cell sequencing, we can take a part of the tumor, separate each individual cell out through this droplet technology, and then we can sequence the genome of that one cell. And then through that, we can find novel ways of targeting the whole cancer all at once for that one patient, rather than just targeting one part of it. So we're just about to publish that. Another one is enabling all the bioinformatics to run on mobile phones and really small devices. This allows people like you guys and the biohackers to kind of actually do this stuff yourselves. There's a new flow cell out called a Flongle. It costs $90. So you can sequence about 1 gigabase. So that's if you're doing bacterial genomics or viral genomics, these things are only a few thousand bases long. You can actually do that now, right now. You can order these. You can get a MinION starter pack for $1,000 US, and then off you go with your sequencing. This is a guy from our lab, Xing. There's someone I've spoken to before from UNSW, computer science guy. Batman there, Sri, and Xing. They're the guys that are from the computer science school at UNSW. And then some stuff I've done about signal analysis, and this is like using AI and machine learning and classical algorithms to look at all this squiggle data and find interesting things in RNA sequencing. And there's like all these challenges about like each one of those squiggles that comes out of these DNA reads, they get like perturbed in time, and so trying to match them with each other. These are exactly the same signals for the same DNA sequence, but there's all this noise that's introduced, and making algorithms that can correct for that. And enabling us to do single cell sequencing in a way that can increase accuracy and yields, and I won't go into that. Now, something cool, again, Gattaca. So this is we're right at the end. This was done a number of years ago, and I really hope someone does it again. These guys took the 23andMe public database. They took an individual that was in that, and they said, how quickly can we figure out who that person is? So they started sequencing here at time 0, and then this is the probability that they're correct. And that is the 10-minute mark. So they could do identification of an individual in 10 minutes. To like 99.9% accuracy. Now, this is being deployed at the moment in the 9/11 survivor matching. So they have bones and tissue and things from people that died in 9/11, and they're doing matching in this way from family members and stuff to try and find who died and how they died, and get their remains back to their families. But it can also be used by the military. They go somewhere and they want to see if the person they've got is actually the person they've got. Well, they can do that in 10 minutes. This other one here was a paternal test. So to see if the son was related to the mother. And it took about 20 to 30 minutes to do that. This usually takes weeks at any regular lab, sometimes months. So this is what this kind of technology brings. And this was done like 4 years ago, I think, 3 years ago. And that is the future now. Like, this is what we can do right now, and yet it's what things like Gattaca were saying. You know, this future. You don't have to have CRISPR-edited babies before you can do this stuff. With that, I'd like to thank my lab, and this is us playing with all our high-tech stuff and our visualization dome. Happy to take questions.
Does the information from the nanopore also contain information on the epigenetics?
Yep. Yeah, so you get all that for free. So as long as you don't do PCR, where PCR is like polymerase chain reactions, it amplifies DNA. When you do that, it strips all the modifications off. If you don't do that, and you're just doing negative DNA, which you can do on this, you do get them in your sequencing. Sequencing by synthesis, you don't get any of that. You actually have to treat the DNA to change every modified DNA to a different base and then figure it out from there. The cool thing is, this can do direct RNA, so it can actually read the RNA transcribed from the genome, and there's 120 known, about 120 known modifications you can have in RNA, and there's about 80 or so that are associated with disease. And so far, we have no way of actually reading these things. It's a really hot topic in this space right now. We created an algorithm to detect 6MA, one of the many modifications, specifically to do this kind of stuff in, especially in neuropsychiatric stuff. So, yeah.
My question is quite specific, or you can just give me your background. I'd like some information if any work you're doing on gene deletion, rare diseases, and any advances in working out which viruses can actually carry these deletions back again.
So like viruses that can cause the deletion?
Right. No, that can carry the missing gene back.
Oh,
Back again.
oh, like AAVs or something. Like trying to treat a deletion. Yeah. Okay, so there's a group that actually is in my institute that deals with rare disease. I think they have something, don't quote me on this, but I think it's something like a 50-something% rate of figuring out what's wrong with someone when nothing else works, which is still pretty good when they've already run out of options. So they can figure out what the problem is. Then when it comes to fixing it, they also have access to things like compassionate drug access and right to try stuff. So they'll find a drug that's maybe cleared for allergies, but it has the exact same, it can target the same thing in the protein that's producing the deletion. So sometimes it's not the deletion in the DNA that's necessarily causing the problem. It's what happens, it misses a bit in the protein as it gets produced. And sometimes it's half there and half not, so you get some protein, it's just you don't get enough protein of one kind. Really depends what it is. And we've had cases just like this, and you can actually supplement the specific protein. Or it might be an action of how the protein's created that you give a drug and it helps like correct for that problem. Or it really comes down to what it is, but yeah, talk to me after. I can put you in touch with people if it's about a particular person or something. Yeah.
James, it's almost a catch-22 that was talk about digital data storage running out of space to store, and DNA was potentially a very efficient way of storing it.
Yep.
Are we going to be in a catch-22 that the amount of DNA we're going to read has to be stored back as DNA because it really is so efficient to do all the data storage?
Yeah, so the cool thing is you can do compression, right? And then you can store it back in the DNA. So like you can potentially store a whole human genome in a smaller space because there's a lot of repetition, a lot of other crap that's in there. This technology, though, the CTO of the company recently announced a new way of doing DNA storage on DNA. He's using epigenetic markers, actually. So you use any DNA, you strip all the epigenome off it, and then you go through and, a bit is just, you just do a modification on a C, a methylcytosine. And then you go to the next C, and it's like either a 1 or a 0, and then you can code your binary. So instead of trying to synthesize it, which is what other people are trying to do, you just use all the DNA that's around us. So we got enough. Like take one tulip, the whole tulip story. We'll take one tulip and it's what, 20 something gigabases, so you can store a couple of human genomes just on one flower. But yeah, I think our current problem is connecting it all together. So like you can store stuff. We have tape storage, so we can go to the petabytes, exabyte space. We can even have all the DNA storage, but getting it from A to B and being able to access it, like that networking infrastructure, that's something we need to do better at. I mean, we have the Australia syndrome where when this tech first came out, we had to do all the calling in the cloud. So, you know, having to upload a terabyte of data. Like,
how fast does it need to be?
How fast does it need to be?
Yeah.
Who asked me that question? Oh, right. How fast does it need to be? Well,
I build 100 gig networks. How fast does it need to be?
as fast as you can give it to me, man.
How much money have you got?
So I mean, I would say like even like we had a 100 megabit connection coming, or it's one gigabit connection coming from our institute. But the problem is that you couldn't ingest the data fast enough at the other end, so that wasn't even enough.
Yeah.
So,
because we can easily do at the moment the 10 simultaneous 100 gig bound connections that can easily give you border on terabit Ethernet.
yeah.
So like,
Oh, that's cool.
like, are you really? We're not ready.
Well,
I think it's more about the computing side. Is probably
well, given I can only use a 10 gigabit line to NCI in Canberra to do the big supercomputers there.
yeah, but that's a monetary thing because every single fiber line can do about a terabit of capacity in DWDM. So I can give you 10 terabit to Canberra.
But you can give that to me, but then you can't give it to anyone else if I'm using the whole line.
No,
So
there's
you like the whole line.
You can think about how much there actually is. And ARNet, as you know, has obscene capacity overseas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just not here.
Around the country, massive amounts of links.
That's what we
Maybe
use.
they're not giving it to you.
Well, yeah, maybe they're not giving it to me. And like,
Because the networking side is kind of there. Come on. I'm really a network engineer these days. But
It looks like your Wi-Fi network isn't connected to the internet.
Oh,
Take a look at the help section.
sorry, I just saw you. Can I take that question here?
Oh, yeah. Take it. Oh, but hey, Steve, just to answer that question a little more, when we have clients from overseas that we sequencing, so like for example the German Shepherd genome we did, we actually mailed them a hard drive because it was faster and cheaper than uploading it to them.
Yes, but it depends where you're doing from. Like ARNet is pretty massive. I mean, if you're in the uni campuses, you can get easily 30, 40 gig links.
Yeah.
So it's more about.
I know we didn't have access to that, so we couldn't use it. So
most of the time, I'm downloading that sort of speeds. It's the hard drives and the operating systems trying to even cache it, much less the network interfaces. And network is not the problem. We've got obscene amounts. Money telcos are ripping us off because there's a seamless capacity that they're just linking to us.
They love this thing where they'll give you upload for free, but every download costs you. So it's like, no, give us the data, but then we're going to charge you some more.
We have the tech.
Yeah. What was those questions back there?
Yeah, I had a question because you seemed like somebody to ask. I think myself, my mom, and my husband, we did a bit of a swap and a couple of years ago, and we're part of the 23andMe.
Yeah.
Do you have any cool tips how to make that useful for somebody like me, halfway through life, hopefully? Apart from just seeing what my markers are, low or high for certain diseases. Could you tell me something for the future that could help sons and others?
Yeah, so direct-to-consumer testing like that, I'm very split on. I think it's great that it's really opened up the space to people being able to play with that and actually understand genomics a little better and want to participate. I think that's beautiful. I think that's fantastic. Its actual usefulness and the ethics around the medical side of things, I think I disagree a lot on the usefulness of that. When we do a clinical whole genome sequencing, it's very different technology to what they're using. They're doing arrays, so they only look at haplotype blocks. So these are just like groups or areas that are associated with different types of changes in the genome. It's not a full genome sequencing because it's much cheaper. Now, when we do one, we give a clinical report, and that report is delivered by a a clinical genomicist and genetic counselor who have the training both psychologically and medically to deliver that information in a way that's meaningful to you, can actually explain these things to you in a way that won't freak you out. Because you can see, oh, I have a 90% risk of some crazy thing, but that can be 100% avoidable if you just say, I don't know, don't smoke, right? And if you don't know that information and you just see this it's like that hypochondriac thing. I read this great book which is you go, oh, I have shoulder pain, and after 3 steps you have cancer. It's like, and it's brilliant to look at. But that's why I think the direct-to-consumer testing, fantastic, but tempered. There are ways to get clinical reports out of them using Promethease, I think it's called, $5. I'll upload your BCF when you get it. Yeah.
Just Jerry, I'm the husband.
Oh yeah?
We got in before the FDA stopped all that reporting.
Yeah.
I mean, when I did mine, we actually had a printable 25-page report that actually said, the probability and the different gaps of years.
Yep.
And I found it extremely useful. Actually, I thought it was great. And if you went into the website, you could actually even see all the scientific papers associated with each one of the findings.
Yep.
There was so much data there that it would take probably about 10 days to read it.
So I would that's great. That's great. You had a really good experience. Again, there is, even with the scientific papers, how many papers does it take for something to be real? Is another question. Scientific papers are also it's difficult to interpret this stuff. For example, the reports we give, we had the first clinically accredited test in the world for the Garvan, and we only give a report that has clinically actionable variants. We don't actually tell them anything else because we don't see it. Doctors don't see it useful, patients don't see it useful. So we say, these are things that you can do right now that can help treat your cancer or your rare disease. And these are FDA-approved clinical trials that you can enroll in. So if there's a huge ethical problem, you're doing it yourself, right to try, yes, go ahead. But have you thought about relatives that perhaps don't want their genome known, and you've just gone and given 99% of their genome away by doing it yourself? And are there privacy concerns around doing that? I don't think we haven't quite seen the designer drugs to kill one person yet, but there's concerns around whether or not you should keep your genomics secret or not.
Yeah. Well, when I was going through a process of changing from one insurance company to another, they did ask me that question, and that actually I said yes, I've done it.
Yeah.
And they said, why do you do it? All of a sudden thinking that I had some sort of illness or something.
Yeah.
And it was just purely out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Just purely curiosity, and I was right.
I think a great business idea would be to create an insurance company where you actually get cheaper premiums if you do whole genome sequencing, and then it tells you, if you smoke, you're good at emphysema, don't do it, or if you have these lifestyle choices, you're more likely to get this disease, don't do it. And if you do those things, then you pay less. I mean, how good would that be?
That's actually that's the European law.
Yeah, the Europeans ban, GMOs, so
you can't do different insurance regimes based on genetic information.
Yeah.
Which means that you can't charge men more than women for life insurance. Because it's based on the genome.
Oh, that seems a bit
Isn't the UK
it's based on statistics?
Yeah.
But based on genome, because you've got different genes.
But even statistically, women are safer drivers. Why would you
But it's based on genome, so it's
yeah. It's an interesting topic to go down.
One last question there.
I'll be around after if you want to ask me all the questions.
Great talk. There was a question I had was around you saying the future is already here. But the way I see it is there's enormous implications in terms of industries getting disrupted because of this. Like you spoke about insurance. Insurance is definitely something that I see getting disrupted because of genomics.
Yep.
And I don't see that happening just yet, and I don't see that happening in the next 5 years as well. So what's your take on when So that would be a signal for me that that's when the future is here for genomics. But what's your take?
Yeah, so I see things like that as like secondary industries, right? So the primary industries are around like the actual personalization of healthcare. That is happening around the world in many hospitals with clinicians who are using this technology to do real-time specific diagnostics of, say, an infection you have. There's a great paper that came out recently, being able to identify tuberculosis in your lungs within 6 hours. Or a urinary tract infection, getting its antimicrobial resistance factors in 6 hours. This is days before a culture can come to it. My own company is aiming to do exactly that same kind of thing, using for sepsis, finding the markers to help treat that and looking at the body's host response. Those things, when I say the future's here, I'm talking about like those things are happening right now. And that's the primary industry around this technology. Things like insurance, I think, they'll come, but they take a little while.
I guess one of the key things is that disruption only occurs when there's a reason for it to occur.
Yeah.
No one disrupts an industry that's not happening. The thing with insurance, that won't happen until a second or a third wave.
Yeah.
Because there is many other ways to disrupt insurance, and like giving people refunds back on not claiming. And there's many other financial ways and structures that a lot of the staff are playing with to just destroy the insurance world or make it more sort of, I guess, fair in a way. So there's a lot of other disruptive areas. But medical is one of those things, we also don't have the threshold in Australia of people yelling and screaming and demanding, so people dying and everything isn't going to change because there's not enough demand for it to certain areas. We follow Europe. Europe is awesome at the moment. Anything they do, especially with GDPR and privacy, don't worry about Australia. It's going to arrive. They're very good with things like that, so just sit there and wait for some other people that have different kind of passions and interests, and Europe is great for privacy.
Yeah.
So we don't really have to care about it here because it's just going to come sweep in, and Australia will just adopt the same GDPR rules as well.
And just to finish on that, and this question, I think it's a good one, is when we talk about oh my god, I said my blank. When we talk about
industries.
Industries can disrupt themselves too, and that's how the reason that you don't have a new cloud provider really, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, IBM, or whatever but anyway, they're providing all the service. They Amazon disrupted themselves, Microsoft disrupted themselves to make Azure, which is now cheaper and in a lot of ways better than AWS. So insurance companies can disrupt themselves by taking on these new things rather than someone having to come in and kick them out like Google or something to the taxi industry. The taxi industry could have changed the whole time, but they didn't.
You could have a reason.
Before you run on that question, what about, I'm thinking more immediate stuff like GSK and Roche and Pfizer. Wouldn't that hurt their bottom line as well if people become more informed in how their bodies are operating?
Not really. No, because they just sell the drugs. I mean, AstraZeneca bought loads of sequencing just so they didn't have to have a middleman, right? They're now massive.
I don't expect them as primary industries at all.
No, I think
disruption is a funny thing.
They adapt so quick, and they've been disruptors forever. So I think they're almost you could learn from them really. They adapt like nothing else really.
Plus, you can make a lot of money investing in dying tech. So I built the whole digital cinema infrastructure for Hoyts, and they made a purchase at the time of those UV boxes, those Hoyts vending machines. Did you see those everywhere? And I'm like, why? Why would you invest in a technology like the video industry that's dying? Because people are stupid. And they expected that to last for 2 years. It went for 6 until they eventually just sold the scattered remains to, what's the last DVD company, DVD shop? No, it wasn't Blockbuster. It was one of the other ones, Easy, whatever they were. But the thing is, that was them investing. They spent about 10 million on a company in stupid dying tech, like people go taking things to a vending machine, and made 4 times the money back. And I'm like, because I was like, this is really smart. Because as we talk about the diffusion of innovation, about you're here, you are the early adopters. Then there is the people who, the only reason they don't buy rotary phones is because they can't. Right? So that's the problem, is there's a lot of people that don't buy a lot of things, just simply that's the only thing left. They're not allowed to buy them anymore. So, and so there's a lot of tech that people are investing a lot of money in dying tech. Weird. So, because it's us really.
That's right. Another round of applause for Jones. a 10-minute break? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have a 5-minute break.
5-minute, 10-minute break, and then we'll have Andrew Greig talking about the future of sci-fi.
Now on the back table, I bought a massive amount of confectionery. There's a little bit about some out of date up there. If you want to have it, it's out of date. It's not much. There's up here. There's tons of chocolate and everything up there. All these addicts, chocolate addicts, are going to go. Okay.
Yeah, it's still good. Yeah, that's still good.
I'm gonna get my stuff.
Alright, thanks for coming,
Thank you.
Christina.
Thanks for everything you guys are doing as well.
Charlie's can come.
gentlemen, we're about to make a start on the Sci-Fi feature. Feature of Sci-Fi, please take a seat. We got Andrew Greig, ready to go. Grab your last drinks, and we'll have a chat. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for Andrew Greig.
Don't forget to switch on the closer. Plenty of empty seats still up the front here. Make sure you squeeze up.
I've got enough friends. That's another one. I tend to move around a bit, so yeah, easy. Triple mic, you never know. Alright, yes. Good evening, ladies and gents. We are here to talk about the future of science fiction from a transhumanist perspective. Now, I actually am from the future, so tonight's format is actually more about me coming to investigate what kind of ideas you have is going to be happening in my time. There will be prizes and there will be punishments as well, so watch out for that. No, it is a purely speculative kind of presentation this evening. Obviously, science fiction itself is a little bit speculative. I don't know if you saw the meetup notice or the Eventbrite notice and went, future of sci-fi. What the hell? That's just stupid. Science fiction already is the future. But I put to you that science fiction is a little bit more than just our imagination of our hopes and desires and our dreams of the future. It is a literary process. It is a creative process. And I argue tonight that it is also a way of being able to access higher levels of I guess, an empathic approach to our future. To our future humans, whether they are ourselves or whether they are our progeny. Or something else that evolves from it. Alright, so what is the fundamentals of sci-fi? There will be quizzes, of course, don't worry. There are so many different versions of what science fiction actually is and how it distinguishes itself from other genres of fiction, say for example. I like the idea that sci-fi is something which has yet to be experienced. Different from fantasy in the fact that fantasy has leaps of imagination which border on and go straight into magic, whereas science fiction has potentially probable/plausible. There's a couple of different variations around that theme. But yeah, so science fiction still has that concept of imagination. Tonight, the kind of perspectives of science fiction that we're going to consider are what we would imagine as being speculative, something that still involves a little bit of humans and our own future. So not something which talks about spiders that evolved on another planet, say for example, unless they were placed there by humans. Are there any particular trends that we can look back on to be able to extrapolate into the future, to be able to go, oh, I know what someone's going to be writing about in 20 years? And the spectrum of science fiction that we cover tonight, there's everything, right? So I talk a little bit about the history. I spend a good 30 minutes telling you about my favorite Star Trek episodes. That's, yeah, so be warned about that one. But it's more about the idea of we've got books, we've got comics, we've got games, we've got movies, we've got TV series, and then imagining as well what might be the case in 20 years. But the core concept tonight, and this is inspired by, of course, our association here in the transhumanist kind of setting, is what kind of changes will we expect to the art, to the literature, to the science of science fiction as humans themselves evolve? We've already had discussions tonight about how genomics is altering the way that we are potentially operating, diagnosing now. What happens when we start doing genetic engineering? Do we speed up evolution? Do we change the kind of... Is that my background? What's my background music?
Oh, it's the dancers next door.
Just slowing it down. The dimming comes in a little bit later.
So, why are we here with the transhumanists and the transhumanist perspective of science fiction? Well, I put to you, there's so much similarity. So we've had the definition from Peter this evening of transhumanism as your 3 rules of
Yes, super longevity, super intelligence, and super well-being. And how do we transcend limitations of our human biology?
Yep. So that's Xing's 3 laws of transhumanism. 3 laws. Yeah. But essentially, there's a couple different definitions that I would like to be able to go through. The fullest extent I imagine for transhumanism and the movement that is at the edge of creating the new kind of paradigm of what humans and humanity is going to be about is the enrichment, extension, empowerment, there's a lot of E words, egalitarianization, I love that word, I made it up, and enhancement of the human experience through application of knowledge, scientific and technological practice. 2 persons. Bit of a mouthful. You can read your own way up there, but the one I like is kind of change personified. So I think that kind of sums up a lot of what we're here for, which is that fusion of biology, technology. How do we move ourselves forward? So they're advancing along Peter's 3 laws, but also for our own societal, humanistic perspective. The foundations in transhumanism, though, a lot of this reads almost exactly the same as the kind of concepts which are core to science fiction. If we go back to the 60s or 70s and people are imagining what a more egalitarian future looks like, one that integrates technology to be able to allow us to connect more deeply with others. There's obviously dystopian versions of that one. It's effectively the same kind of core, so I think there's a lot of fusion between the transhumanist perspective of science fiction. You'll go this evening, and I actually wore the same shirt. Just in case. So you wouldn't miss me. So we'll call them speculative degrees. So there's 4 that I've got so far, and quite helping someone, so you just make some bad decisions sometimes in life. But I've got a degree in biotech, degree in biochemistry, a degree in bodies, as I call it, which is exercise science, and one in business as well. So the 4 Bs. At the moment, I'm working for an artificial intelligence and machine learning consultancy. I do operations, so I'm not going to try and big note myself that I know exactly the kinds of things that are going on. But I know enough about what's happening in the AI space that I know that the computers aren't yet going to be taking us over.
But you still bought that shirt.
But what I suppose the theme tonight, I was inspired by last transhumanist meetup last month, which covered effectively the history of this particular transhuman group. And but also one of the things that comes into play was one of Peter's quotes, which was, if it was one that appeared on, I think, on a television show, a televisual show, about if we imagine a future without death, surely we have to sort of reimagine the kind of narratives that play out in human life. So it got me thinking, what is the actual connection? Like, what happens, what is the narratives that we will face in the future now that we are evolving at such an extended pace? How do we match those 2 things up? Now, any good presentation, of course, has a little bit of an either sub-story. Mine is a sub-story. It's my association with science fiction. I stopped reading in order to be able to make myself grow up, because I did not believe that I was becoming an adult fast enough. I wasn't evolving fast enough according to societal standards. I actually stopped myself from reading or engaging with any science fiction for 12 years.
Give into it. Look at this place. Give in.
So, and then I spoke to, then Xing decided to one-up me, and he said that he has not read science fiction for...
Oh, about 20 years.
Okay, yeah, there you go.
Wait. You can read?
Audiobooks. Still reading it.
So, if I had only taken Xing's example and actually done something else with the time that I was saving by not reading science fiction, I think I would be a lot further ahead than I am now. But the whole journey was sadly unsuccessful, and I think that I've actually come back to I suppose a more full understanding and appreciation of what goes on in life, probably more optimistic about the future by having that kind of regular touchstone with a little bit of science fiction. It takes one out of oneself. And whether it's dystopian or utopian, when you're working in that kind of technology space as well, it's often nice to be able to think what others have done as almost an advice for the future, a little guideline, an idea for what could be developed, but also an admonition not to do a certain thing. So it's nice to be able to stand on the sort of shoulders of those who have gone before us, whether they're scientific or literary. In order to investigate the concept then this evening of we can know something about the future of our stories about our future. But actually, I got headaches doing this presentation and preparing it, so just bear with me sometimes. But if you imagine, say, 20 years in the future, if that person is writing about science fiction, what is it that they're actually going to be covering? How is that going to be different to the people writing science fiction now, or 20 years ago, or 100 years ago? There are 5 basic hypotheses that we have to be able to cover to be able to say that we can know something about the future of sci-fi. First one is that there will be evolution of humans, and that evolution will drag along with it the evolution of the literary genre that is science fiction. Number 2, that there may be, in order to be able to predict the future, we want to be able to identify patterns in the past. That's from my machine learning data sciencey background. So we look back at the history of it to be able to go, is there some way of knowing what's going to happen 20 years in the future by looking at what's happened in the past? Part 3 is the future is in some way knowable. Of course, we can't say that because we can't look into the future except I've been there. We can, however, use science fiction as a tool to be able to create a potential science fiction future in which the writer then creates further science fiction. Number 4 is that there exists some general trends in science fiction which don't necessarily replicate the experience of individuals in the literary past, but that we'd like to see enacted in the future of science fiction. Number 5 is that there are past patterns which can be applied to extrapolate the future, i.e. we will not enter a world in which there's no science fiction. Can you imagine? Monstrous idea that there would be no science fiction. However, it has existed before, and I will put to you that it was probably only 200 years ago that it did not exist. What existed before that? Why is this at all important, interesting, or relevant? Well, first of all, there was pizza this evening, so I think that's very relevant. Humanity is defined by its stories. So if you read some of the works of Noah Yuval Harari, the concept that drew us out of, I suppose, of the savannah where we didn't form societies, the concept which has led us to where we are now is the fact that we can tell stories. We can tell stories, we can believe stories, we can engage with stories. So science fiction, if humanity is defined by its stories, science fiction is a way of encapsulating a lot of our hopes, dreams, and fears about the future. More than retrospective fiction, more than speculative fiction on other planets where there's magic, more than mythical or religious fiction, science fiction is a way of encapsulating what's happening now and going, what is that going to turn into the future? And as you well know, there are so many different technologies that are available today, which we could have read about 10, 20, 50 years ago in the imaginations of some of the greatest literary artists out there. So some of the ideas and concepts which we live in do have that history in science fiction stories. And so I think that's important. If you could take that time machine into the future and work out what people are writing about 20 years hence, they've already integrated all technology which has been developed in the last 20 years, say, and they're writing about things that we probably have no concept of whatsoever. That would be fascinating. So to read a piece of science fiction from 20 years in the future would be mind-blowing, I think. Second point, of course, most of us here probably enjoy sci-fi. Hands up, yes. A few people in the audience, that's good. I put to you, you're probably in the wrong spot if you don't enjoy some sort of sci-fi. The problem, though, when we look at just the narrative concept of sci-fi is that it represents a single point of view, a single timeline, say, for example, without necessarily looking broader at some of the concepts of humanity, humanity's place in the universe, humanity's place within the universe that has been created in that science fiction. And I think what the main point that I want to make tonight is that by practicing future empathy, by being able to put ourselves into a future world, we start to be able to open ourselves not only to new ideas about technology, but new ideas about ourselves, and I suppose a level of new responsibility and empathy for those who come after us. One limitation, one big caveat, of course, to our investigation tonight is that sci-fi is incredibly diverse. Settings can be just about anything you imagine. Technology can have made any kind of leap up to, but not including magic, because that would turn into fantasy. There can be any number of POV characters. There could be non-human, there could be evolved humans. You could be going forwards or backwards in terms of technological development. Sometimes science fiction is just a nice little way of being able to put effectively a hero's journey on a spaceship. I'm not looking at you, Star Wars. Is it forecasting or is it just guessing? When I mentioned that a bunch of stuff in here might have been imagined or written about in previous science fiction, what were all the misses? What were all the things that were imagined that just never actually came to pass? Over time, it has evolved, of course. If you go back and read some of the science fiction literature from, say, 100 years ago, there's a lot of sketchy concepts in there when we're talking about things like race, gender, or religion. So it does evolve over time, but we do get different perspectives. And I don't know if you... I was watching one of the latest Star Treks, one of the latest movies, and just going, oh, aside from the fact, they go through warp speed, 5-7 times the speed of light, just patently. In my future it's fine, but in this current reality, it's not.
It exists.
There you go, yeah, it exists.
You just can't power it.
Yeah.
We think about the sheer physics of it and go, you're accelerating, you're decelerating, but yet you're quite happy having conversations. In fact, you're going to have like a cup of wine while you're walking around the deck. But then you get fired upon by some other ship, and then all of a sudden the whole vessel is thrown left, right. So, and it's also much nicer when you're looking like 200 years in the future to just people it with people who pretty much look like us. Whereas I don't think that's going to actually be the case. It's much easier casting. So my core concept, of course, stepping into the future humans clubs, we can deepen appreciation of not just the craft of science fiction, but also our appreciation of the people that live it. Now, it is a meet up this evening, so I do have my first task for you all. You have 5 minutes. Next to you, or behind you, or somewhere in proximity to you, you will find either a neighbour or a small group. So there are 3 things that I want you to find out from, preferably one neighbour. It makes it much easier to remember. First thing that you're going to find out from them, and you've got 5 minutes, is their name. You've got to remember the name as well. Second thing is, what's their second favourite? You can go first favourite, I don't really care. Second favourite science fiction creation and why? And the third thing that I want to find out is, what's one thing that you will think will change about the future? What's one thing that they think is going to change about the future of science fiction? What's going to happen in 20 years' time with science fiction? Rule of engagement is, of course, and if you do a search on science fiction literature in Amazon, as I did just before coming over, you end up with something 100,000 plus. It stops listing the number of science fiction stories. So one of my rules for engagement this evening is, if the person doesn't know the science fiction title, don't get upset. It's very easy, often with fanboy, fangirl, fan person situations. We can end up going, my God, you haven't read the foundation. I did preface this, of course, by saying that I hadn't read science fiction for 12 years, so I've got a lot of catching up to do. So if you do ask me at some stage tonight, but what about this? Or, but what about this particular, what do you think about this? Or have you read this? I will say no. What's the next part of that conversation is you explain a little bit about that story. So the person that you're talking to doesn't know the title of your second favourite science fiction. Explain a little bit about what goes on. You can talk about theme, you can talk about settings, or how it makes you feel. 5 minutes, and then I will ask random people in the audience to explain what their partner's answers were. So it is a meetup, it is a community event. Get it?
Pick someone new, guys. Like, not someone you know already.
I like it. I like seeing the energy in the room when you get people talking about the Stargate. The Stargate, yeah. Battles over that. So when you get the energy in the room when people start talking about their favourite sci-fi, and that's what I like about, I suppose, imagining the potential, the future of it. So, as promised, it'll be a random selection of 3 people, and you will be tested and you will be watched. Man. Yes. Who is your partner? Which one would you like to talk about? Okay. Bring it in.
Her favorite, or second favorite sci-fi that she's seen recently was the new Blade Runner movie.
Oh, yes.
And she thought it was very interesting and she liked it because it examined a lot about like human relationships and things like that, which is something that's fairly universal. So no matter how our technology changes and things like that, we'll still, have to relate to other people, and there'll still be, love and romance, but it might change its shape. It will be drastically different than it is today, but it will still be there. And one thing she thought would change about the future of sci-fi, that there would probably have to be a lot more like diversification on the way that they address issues, things like social inequality and like racial issues and things like that will definitely come more into the light and be more addressed.
Was she right? Excellent. All right. So again, who is your partner? First of all, we'll get you to introduce yourself. Actually, what was your name?
My name is Vivek.
Vivek. Okay, good.
And I have 2 partners, Ryan and Giga.
Very good. That's very poly. That's very future.
Very It's the future.
Yeah. So do a fusion. So we'll do one answer for each of them.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. We didn't have time to get into the second question really, so. Yeah. So the names. Was the movie Transcendence, the Johnny Depp movie, and Ryan, it was a mech animal.
Yeah.
Guns. That's.
There you go. Excellent. So how did that make you feel? not the experience of that. The Gundam movie, the mech movie.
It's interesting.
Gunbuster, okay.
It's exploring the effects of time dilation on the human relationships.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Will you do one more person? I'm going to check how I'm doing for time. There's a few more of these kind of activities coming up. Keep that in mind though. So like a reasonable amount of diversity there. I like that. I do like the Blade Runner movies. I think the original Blade Runner I must have watched. That would be where I was wasting so much of my time that I decided not to do 12 years worth of sci-fi. Yeah, I must have watched it about 10 times. So I'm into it. All right. So when we're looking at our various hypotheses this evening, that in some way we can know something about the future of what writers will create. Our first hypothesis was, as human sci-fi creators and their environments evolve, so too will their creations. All right. Do we reckon this hypothesis will hold up? Show of hands. Show of ears. Okay, we have one person. That's good. It is true, humans are evolving. I mean, we never stop evolving, we never stop living, we never stop dying. Actually, we do stop living.
Hey, we're working on it!
At some stage we will stop that. But remember, that whole concept is part of the inspiration for this evening. How will the narratives change if we lose death? There's a couple of sci-fi stories about that as well. So, humans have been evolving for a long while. We just seem to have potentially accelerated the process recently. And you could say that it's large-scale technological processes, some sociological ones, some economic ones, some environmental pressures, and we can imagine that they're going to accelerate again in the future, especially along the technological and climate change / environmental disaster type of scenario. The technologies that we have available in the sciences and the more importantly than that is the readily available or the widely distributed technologies that will allow us to be able to extend our lives, that give us a lot more in terms of preventative or regenerative healthcare and keeping us alive for a lot longer, and the potential for cybernetics / brain-computer interfaces. Really expands this idea that we've gone past just the pure geological era type of evolution that humans have gone through for the last 60, 80,000 years. And it's a concept that I want to bring up from a science fiction writer called China Miéville. This is a quote that he was using when describing or explaining why there was such a difference between, say, awards / recognition of science fiction in literary awards compared to science fiction recognition. And his claim was that science fiction is more about the concept of estrangement, which kind of pushes away the literary thing, which is more about recognizing yourself in a story. So even though we are evolving, what are we evolving to? And it's not just the physiological or the phenotypical outcome that I'm talking about here. Are we evolving towards something that we think that we will recognize or that we think that we'll be estranged from? And I put to you that the further out from now that we get, if we continue to evolve at the potentials that are being heralded now, is that future for some of us will be very estranging, say 100 years out. For some of us, we will recognize or we will want to recognize some elements of humanity in there and we'll be drawn towards it. So embodied within this kind of quote is this concept that, and it's almost the thing that Steve mentioned before, which was there are some people who are very early adopters. We could say that in this room, potentially, we can make the argument that a bunch of us are kind of early adopters. But the estrangement that the science fiction versus literary communities face could be mirrored in the idea that 50 years from now, some of us will go, yes, we should be living forever. We should have brain-computer interfaces. We should be evolved in technological ways. Whereas there's going to be a vast portion of the community, of the world, who's going to say, that's completely estranging and I want no part of it. And as we embrace diversity, so some of the conflicts that are around the world, the social diversity, how is it that we're actually going to evolve? Are we going to make it readily available to everybody, this technological revolution? So in what ways and in what forms could humanity potentially evolve? Two broad schools of thought. We're either going to get better or are we going to kind of go downhill from here? Looking at the more utopian side, do we become more spiritual through technology? That's why I like the idea of. We have that connection both with humanity and technology. More connected, more kind, more loving, more joyous, more beautiful, more diverse, more immortal. Not completely immortal, I don't think we're going to do that just yet. Will we become starfaring or will we become soul-searching? These all sound like glorious ideals of the future. And if you do read the earlier version of more utopian sci-fi, they're also incredibly boring to read because nothing happens. It's like the Matrix when we plug ourselves in and the computers make everything perfect. There's something fundamentally flawed with that idea with us. Or do we have a dystopian type of future from now? Will the science fiction creators or writers of the future live in a world that is more unequal? That for me is my number one version of a dystopia, by the way. Testing on that later. Less human. So do we devolve or do we evolve so completely that there's no humanity left? Is that a bad thing? Are we given over more to emotions? Are we less to emotions? Are we less curious? Are we more amoral? Do we lose our moral centers? Now, if you think about the broad range of science fiction literature, movies, TV series, whether we talk Black Mirror, it's actually really easy to swap those two lists over. You can create settings where any one of those utopian ideals turns into a dystopia. So no joy there for being able to determine which direction that we're going to go in. Because depending on where you are, I could say that, inequality is a horrible thing, but if you gave me $1 billion, I'd be kind of like, yeah, that's probably not, I could still see that it's not great, but maybe not interested in that as a lesson. So activity number 2, this is where the fingertips hit the tablet pads, the tablets. You can do some writing. You can do some stuff.
The real world, it is not Twitter.
You're going to do some either writing or thinking or some noting or some discussing or a combination of all of the above. I've got some very high-tech, I work in a data science machine learning AI company. There's some very high-tech instrumentation here. Some paper and some pens if you do need them, because you are going to write some stuff. What I want on the left-hand side of the room. If you're reading on the left-hand side of the room, that is your left side. That will be what society is like for every person. I want you to imagine 20 years from now, 2040. I'm sure you've all come into here with some sort of concept of what maybe you're doing or what the world is doing in 2040. So on the left-hand side, this is what I want you to consider, and I want you to take a couple of minutes to be able to either note it down, you can write down on paper, you can put it down on your phone, tap up some notes. If anyone remembers the days of actually tapping individual buttons, like on a BlackBerry or even one of those Nokias, I think we've evolved from that point that everyone should be able to take just a couple of notes up. So left-hand side, you're talking about the imagined 2040, what the every person is doing. So what kind of settings are there? What's happening politically, economically? What kind of work do people do? What kind of ills and blessings have forsaken this particular society? How healthy and happy are you? You can be anywhere in the world, you can be anywhere off-world. As long as you imagine it's relatively realistic. So that's 2040. For those of you on the right-hand side of the room, this is more like a job interview question. Where do you see yourself? Where do you see yourself in 20 years? So I think realistically as well. Popular examples are CEO of a large tech company or frozen somewhere waiting to be thawed out on planet X943 something or other. Anyway, so 20 years from now, think about what's happening in your life. What are you doing? What do you look like? Do you look much the same as you do now? Because 20 years from now, we're all perfectly preserved. Are you younger than you are now? Yeah. You have, let's say, 6 minutes. Jot down a couple of ideas, discuss it with friends. If it goes over 6 minutes, let me know. Yeah, it's still good. That's a very noisy lot of writing on paper. A very noisy lot of taking notes as well. Now, I ask you to take notes because you will develop some of these characters, you'll develop some of these concepts that we're just working on. Because we're going to use a couple of sci-fi techniques to refine those. So, if you've not taken a couple of notes, I see some mad scribbling going on here, that's good. Silver tongue, I'm not sure what that is about, but I'm interested to find out what that is. So you keep that one, because we're going to discuss it later. You will discuss it in small group. Because this is part of the fun. This is actually part of the fun of the fusion, like the creation of science fiction. Is it enlivens you, like the whole creative process. And this is why I don't think we're going to be avoiding the human side of science fiction for a long while. It's fun. You create things, you imagine things, you synthesize things, and then you bounce off someone else who you're talking with. So you have not only your imagination, but interaction and connectivity. So that's it. Done for the night. No, that's fine. So one of the key things is one thing that we still on this concept of that humans are going to be evolving, and that we will take along science fiction as part of the evolution. Is that when we consider what happens with reality versus in science fiction, is that evolution itself doesn't have an endpoint. Take a gentleman's point at the back, that evolution is probably the wrong word to use there, especially if we are creating that kind of evolutionary pressure through technology. But science fiction narratives, when we think about a science fiction story, whether it's Altered Carbon, or or whether it's Blade Runner, or whether it's
Blackberry.
oh, pressure. Pressure.
Yes.
All of a sudden being pointed at. What's the name
Hey.
of science fiction? Yeah.
Ooh, future Star Trek, yes.
Okay, good. Whether it's testing. Whether it's Star Trek. So the narratives, as part of the process of creating a narrative, is you've got to create kind of an endpoint. You've got to go, here it is, and no further. You can develop your own timeline, obviously, through that, but it's within a set universe, and you kind of just focus in on the heroes and the villains. Because that's what a story is. Life is a lot more boring. Obviously, the story, the setting happens at the end of your science fiction story. There's either a great tragedy, there's usually not a great comedy. Science fiction comedy is not a big genre, subgenre. There you go, so it's coming up. That would be one of my favorite kind of genres, subgenres of sci-fi. There's a wonderful ceremony, so we think at the end of Star Wars Episode 4, and they have that, they didn't think they were going to make another movie, so everything's music and sound and people pinning medals on each other. It's wonderful. That's wonderful for narrative, and it's good for science fiction because you've created that universe. But in real life, someone then needs to go take a shit. Someone needs to go and eat afterwards. You pin the medal on, you've got to take it off because you've got to have a shower. Life gets a little bit boring. And so when we are addicted to just the sci-fi aspect, we end up kind of going into kind of like a 2D kind of setting. And we put ourselves, we imagine the sci-fi future without actually putting ourselves into it or going deeper. So it's easy enough to write a story that's set 20 years in the future. But as soon as I get you to start thinking about being that person or in the proximity of that person or in that universe and going, what's that person going to write about their own future? You have to dive that little bit deeper. So when we're talking about this concept of future empathy, what is it? What are some of the other things that can actually place pressure for a person in the future to change, that will motivate them and make them desire to actually write about it or blog about it? Yeah, what we've submitted to shape. I'm going to borrow my business study. I can't claim that I actually do any good business whatsoever. I have studied business. There is a particular model which I just like as a quick and dirty method of being able to identify some of the external pressures that could be extant that will shape what a person's life is going to be like. And that is political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal/moral, the pestle model. We are all at the whims of a potential pestle right now. So being able to fiddle around with the different elements of that and be able to identify what are those pressures along each of those axes does give you a kind of concept of what are the shaping elements of your setting. It's not just about high-rise towers and flying cars. It's actually what's going on at the level of what's society value, what's a vice, what's a virtue in the future. When we're talking this evening about the whole idea of genomics, or whether we talk about brain-computer interfaces, are we evolving ourselves faster? Do we upload our consciousnesses? What created evolution is going to be occurring? And the reason, one gentleman asked, why am I only doing it 20 years in the future? There is a good reason. You suggested
200 years.
200 years. And I like that idea, and a lot of sci-fi is set obviously 200 years. There's actually there's a wonderful series of examples of sci-fi where they've kind of gone one up from each other and gone 200 years. I laugh at that. They'll go backwards in time 1 billion years, and then they'll go forwards in time 10 billion years. So there's this whole sort of race to the end that we're not going to go too far out. And I like the idea of, say, a 20-year, because we can imagine it without getting too fantastic.
What limits do you put on it before it's imagined based on what we know and bullshit?
One of the reasons I think 20 years is that we can, in 20 years' time, if someone came back like me from the future, they would say, look, this is a technology that exists. Imagine, so if it's something that's brand, like, here's a hard concept. Imagining something which is completely brand new. And I'll give you this example. So if someone did bring back technology from 200 years in the future, how would they describe it that we can understand it? Or how would the person in our era who starts to use it and understands it describe it to someone else? What are you going to do? You can't make up a noise that says, because what you have to do is start to explain it to other people. And so you'll say, it's like this. It's like this plus this plus this plus this. It's like what happens when you do that and then you combine it with this and then you twist that and then you
even 200 years into the future is not really not too far off. A few thousand years into the future, I probably would say yes.
That's true. I like your argumentativeness. I'm going to say, what if the singularity happens in the next 20?
2045.
2045?
34
Yeah,
hours
but
and 10 hours and 27 seconds.
I'm going to beat up today. Exactly. What happens then, and sort of time dilates to such an extent that 2,000 years is so far
3 years
away.
ago, we were supposed to fly. Probably 2015, we were supposed to fly the flying skateboards.
We've got them. We've got them, and we've even got now flying cars. This Uber Melbourne kind of idea. So all these things, but they're kind of impractical.
I'm starting to call myself the anti-futurist because that's what Shadi and I do with lots of futurists. Because most futurists today are so full of shit they have no idea. And the key reason is that's what we call the exponential rollback. Every event exponentially changes every other event. So when people talk about, oh, it's the future event, I said in 2050, I'm just going, shut up. You cannot do it. Because you look at things like Pokemon Go and what geolocation that did. That changed many things. So you've got this exponential of every single tech that comes out right now, from 3D virtual reality, augmented reality, all these things are starting to come together, and everyone massively affects the other one. So it's an exponential roll. So even trying to go 2030 for most things, just bullshit. And most futurists are just spinning crap because they just everything that is projected is based on just dream of now. Because you have to imagine, okay, let's say when we've all got Teslas and we've all got self-driving cars, which literally could be 3-4 years, how does that change? There's going to be 95-year-olds and drunk people driving around because they don't need to drive anymore. Anyway, things like that. So that's going to put more people back on the road. There's going to be 8-year-olds going to school in cars in 6. So how does that change everything else that keeps rolling? So that's the key problem, is it's this exponential roll. So when anyone tries to work their way, jump to that point, I just call bullshit. Now there are things that take time, like a gigafactory to build. So you can go on some giant infrastructure, that's going to take a while to build that. But there's a lot of things that are just complete crap, because we have been having new things. Go look up, today, 5 or 5 days ago, there was an event that happened. Everyone knows DJI drones? Did you see what they released the other day? Holy shit. Yeah. They've released their first ground drone, and it is we do weaponization of technologies, and it is
Are you getting one?
Deadly.
Are you getting one?
And it's $500, and it's going to, holy crap. We're about to have, follow me around robots at home, massively in the future. No. They're selling them as fast as they can in the US. They're called Temi. They're already here. They're only $1,500, which is cheaper now than some of your phones. So some of this technology that we dream about is not dreaming anything. It's like as soon as the sales cycle gets to us, it's actually already here. We've got self-driving cars, we've got robots at home, we've got some of these drones that are insane, and then you exponentially roll everything on top of that. So how can you predict more than 5? We futurists, and we conservatively go 5 to 7 years for some areas. Anything beyond that, a futurist is bullshitting to you, unless it requires $10 billion to build and a massive amount of giant resources, which obviously things take time to build. But there's not much else. I mean, how long till we have construction, vehicles, all this stuff that's building everything? As the Tesla versions, let's just go move that 100 tons of dirt from there to there. Well, actually, they've already been released. There's about 3 or 4 of them around. Combine harvesters that do farms, all self-driving. This stuff's here. So you roll that all together.
It's the rolling together.
I'm not even sure how to do sci-fi. This stuff is here now. We have trouble. I'm not saying we have trouble explaining some things of today to people. Why hasn't VR taken off? Most people don't understand. We do, but it's because people can't. There's so much that we cannot actually use words for. Like you try and explain. Anyone here tried 360 VR? 360 video? You sure? All these people say, "Oh yeah, I've tried VR." Some have, but where you're actually in a room like this.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't explain that to anyone. So I try to explain sex to your son. He's going to feel like this, and he's like, When it happens, so you can't explain VR how that's going to feel until the reason VR hasn't taken off is you'll literally stop everyone on the street and go, try this, and they go, oh my god, and you next one. Because you can't do ads for it.
Yeah.
So we're having trouble now explaining. I try and explain to normal people that there's brain tech, that we can control computers with our thoughts. They think we're idiots. It's been around for 8 to 10 years.
It's been in science fiction a lot longer.
No, but we can't explain it to the people that are here today that it exists, that we've got it. I just get called bullshit all the time. I've got thought controller helicopter sitting over there. And people don't think it's even real today. So how do you deal with sci-fi when they can't deal with now? That's kind of a weird
Instead of brain chip, so they just get instantly.
I know, it's just like, today is complicated enough. Because we struggle as futurists to try and talk about even now.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun. How do you? It's complicated.
I'm glad I picked 20 years in the future and not 200 years. I'm in trouble then.
We just did a military thing and that, in Canberra. It was all about, okay, in the next 20, 30 years, we're going to talk about drone, blah, blah, blah. We're like, how about we revise it to 5? And they were talking aerial drones. I'm like, what about ground and subsurface? And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, they've just been released. And they're like, this is the Navy, the top of the military admirals, everything going, oh shit. They don't know what's going on.
But if we're talking about the future of empathy, which is in some respects reliant on the fact that humans catch up to what the fuck's happening. So, first thing, social media hit what, now 10 years ago-ish? Less time? And only now are we, having studies done by people in whatever, but like, we're now having studies going, oh, it might not be a great thing that we're all glued to red screens and all the time.
So many cigarettes.
But, okay, so we knew that, but it's super addictive and they make it super addictive and we all like being angry at each other in short bursts. So, I guess the thing with this is we can have all the tech we want and all the crazy tech that comes out of sci-fi and straight into, but then humans and human ability to cope with it and interact with people, like that's a whole nother story.
I've never heard anyone talk about it like you. Like we think about it because we think about 360 video and things like that, and they're like, people are like, yeah, okay. There is going to be addiction factors and problems trying to drag people kicking and screaming out other worlds because they can't do things.
And there's been stories written about that.
Yeah, but there's movies about it in the last 10 years, but we've got problems now. We've got gamers that are so addicted they're dying at their consoles because they've gamed for 5 days and stuff. When you start to replace reality that we can today, the empathy and the side of understanding people, that's not many people actually talk about that, and that's a pretty serious thing.
But it speaks to your point about that whole the leading edge and the trailing edge. A lot of the changes that we see, that's why science fiction sort of captures the imagination a lot.
Just in time.
But it captures popular imagination as well. So when the pops came out in, say, the 30s, 40s, 50s, they captured a whole new generation of people. And I remember there was a quote, I can't remember who said it now, but this concept of what was the best age for science fiction? And the answer is 12. Yeah, so when you're 12 and you're reading this and you're engaging with it for the first time, it is amazing, it is wonderful. It opens the mind to a whole new thing. Steve, you'll be at the sort of the very leading edge of it, so knowing what kind of technologies are available, there will be big chunks of people who are going, what's a drone? How is that impacting my life?
People are struggling with what's here.
Yeah.
And people think like, oh, maybe I'll get a self-driving vehicle. People don't understand the problem that's going to come from that. There's going to be new social stigmas and problems where they're going, do you let your vehicle choose if it's going to hit someone, or do you let it save you first? And there'll be people being ostracized based on the fact that they know, I don't care if it's a 4-year-old on the street, I'm going to survive. And how do you, people think they want a car. Which one do you buy based on whether it's going to choose to kill you or not? But that's based on coding. What if the code's a mistake? And that what it thinks is a 4-year-old girl is a piece of garbage bag. Do you let your car kill you? So there's a whole bunch of complicated things that we actually have to deal with now, because the vehicles are here. We're just waiting on legislation and a few little bits. It's here. And we don't even know how to deal with those things now. How do the courts change? Can I still drive my self-driving Tesla when it's allowed after I've been busted for driving over the limit? I don't have a license. Does it matter? Who cares? And there are certain cars I will still be able to drive. We work with the courts and that they are confused as shit. They have no idea what's going on. Supreme Court, all that being spoken at the Law Society and things like that. They have no idea. They care about using technology in law, and none of them are actually thinking about the law of technology in any way. We keep talking about problems and like these things, and they're like because Tesla, I bet you know anything about them. I can push my smartphone down the road and come and park outside. What if someone walks in front of that and gets killed? Whole moral quandary. That's a societal thing, and we have to deal with it now. And has anyone much thought about that? No, there's a lot more ethics and morals to buying a Tesla. That's a problem.
It's called creative evolution.
Creative evolution. Well, there's going to be a lot of things. The China way actually is like, see, we're a problem. We are a problem in Australia, in that we outweigh the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many. So we care about like in Queensland, the mines, a couple of birds. So we're going to stop billions of dollars of mines. Not a bad thing, but that's the mentality. You know, the US military will send massively trained soldiers in to rescue a stupid journalist, and 3 of them get killed, and 2 helicopters will go out millions of dollars to rescue one idiot that shouldn't have been there in the first place. China, on the other hand, steps on the bird, cooks it, eats it, and builds 50 airports because they have to. They move millions of people because they have to build a new dam infrastructure to just keep everyone with water, and they built whole cities to put them in. We are a bit of a problem. How long since we've been trying to get a second airport in Sydney? We're an embarrassment.
Yeah, we should have a dictatorship.
It's not about dictatorship. It's about we care more about this bubble. We're in a bubble. You can do anything you want as long as it doesn't affect me. People have got to learn to a little bit affect you. Take on a little bit of all got to take it. You should be able to have a mosque or a prison or something there. None of us want the not pleasant stuff near us. So we've all got to start to. So the societal changes. We're talking about what's the societal future. We need to think a little more about us as opposed to me. And I think that's going to affect the tech, the attitudes to tech, all that crazy stuff.
The adoption of it, and that's why I think that's
don't have to do that. The miners don't have to do that, of course.
I'm happy to take on the role as transhumanists dictating the world, but benevolent dictator.
Benevolent. And that's why I think that there is place for science fiction, and I'm not going to give anything away here by saying that I think science fiction will still exist for a while in the future. It's almost a way of being able to help disseminate some of what's available or some of what's possible with tech, along with concepts which speak more to someone or to the masses, humanity. So there's different levers that people can press when they end up writing a science fiction story. So being able to prepare people for the kind of changes that are inevitable or are available becomes one of the arts of that literary art of science fiction.
But what happens when it starts to become like more true? I had the weird job of trying to explain Elon Musk to an older person. Yeah, so he's got an electric company, a solar house company, and a rocket company, and he put his own car in space the other day. And they're like, that's compute. I'm like, well, it's the closest we've got to a James Bond villain, technically. And what? A person? I'm like, yeah, now NASA just gets him to, and they're like, what? They just hadn't, they're in aged care and everything, they just hadn't, they're not stupid, they're not exposed. They didn't know. And they were like, now, how did this happen? It's gone from a James Bond movie to there's now a guy who can actually do this shit. Who at one point was going, yeah, I'm just going to do it on Mars. And hang on, what did I say? Okay, terrible. I mean, people, this is real. He's the one who's going to do the first trip to Mars, and now other companies, other space agencies are going, we should send people to the moon quick. But how do you explain what real is now to some people who are just going, what?
Put it in narrative format so they can actually start to understand and start to place it within their own context.
It scares them a bit.
He's got the money. He can create anything.
No, it's good though, because it scares people that aren't up to date on stuff. Yeah.
He's a disruptor.
When you suddenly go, all this sci-fi, now real.
Have you met a boomer though? Like that's what happens.
Try to explain it. I've got like 3 implants. It's like freaks people out.
They don't quite get that stuff. It's like they complain about us taking our phones all the time, but the same comments is talked about newspapers.
So your world is interesting in that the whole CRISPR thing. That's the next thing that's going to start to become this week news article here. Someone uses this, something happens here.
What do you mean next? It's happening now.
No, it's happening.
Brought in front of the.
It's happening, but the public doesn't get it. The public doesn't get it.
Yeah, you can buy it for $120.
It was in a movie with The Rock, so we all get
That's right. See, you can tell that to most people, and the public, they won't understand it.
Yeah.
So we put these headsets that are on Horatio up here, these TDCS headsets, into the Australian Rugby League team. Mel and the whole team's got 3 years ago. Full-page article about it. People read it, talks about Halo Sports, the technology. You get to say, so what was it about? And they're like, I don't know, they're using something new. No understanding that these are superhuman performance relating equipment around. And they don't believe it, and that's years ago. Someone can drive with thoughts on, there's Australian company's got the headsets, driving by thought. You ever thought that 8 years ago, I'm being careful by an Australian company. 8 years ago. What we can do now, there's been 6 people convicted so far by being able to scan their brain and understand intent. Or whether they're pulling from a memory or if they're constructing a lie in the creative section. 6 people being convicted to sentences so far in the world.
Really? Can I buy that?
India was the first. The CIA's got a bit of a problem. It's discovered that most of their staff are sociopaths because it doesn't affect sociopaths. They're lying. But there's problems with this tech that is so amazing that we're in trouble figuring out how to use it now. I love this stuff. I love how people talk about how people are going to feel about it. Not just Superman with house, blah. That's what everyone thinks when they talk about the future. 9 Man and that kind of stuff. But it's now. We talk a lot about the future of work. Everyone talks about the future of work. It pisses me off at the moment. People talk about robots. Nothing to do with robots. It's going to be enhanced us. Smart drugs, headsets, training, low-end mechanic stuff. That's going to be the thing that's going to steal your job. The guy next to you taking smart drugs and work for 5 days on end. That's the guy that's going to take your job, not the robot. And people just don't understand that that's here now. That 24% of students in the US are using that already. Australia is starting to increase. That's one of the things I trouble about is that we say the future all the time, but we're not here to talk about the future. We're here to try and explain now to you. And they freak out it now.
Yeah, that is our challenge. I'm going to crack on with this.
You crack on, you sorry.
Otherwise, I'll keep people there. All right. So, as we were talking about then, many different forms of creative evolution. So, if you are imagining 20 years ahead, 5 years ahead, 200 years ahead, 2,000 years ahead. All right. What are the kind of forms that we have adapted ourselves? Let's not forget the whole idea of personhood, though. So you, me, everyone in this room has our own concept of our own identity, of our own presence in the world. It is our personhood. There is the things that, if they took it away, we wouldn't understand. We wouldn't actually conceive of what it means to be whatever it is that replaces it. So in some way, shape, or form, this is actually going to stay around. So the whole concept of personhood, what's going to change, what's not going to change in 20 years, 200 years, 2,000 years, 5 years. Thoughts, fears, hopes and desires, will they go? Will we take smart drugs or will we take other forms of technological intervention which removes our ability to have fears? What does that society look like?
I think we should do both.
We can experiment. That's
All of it.
So the other concept of personhood, which we haven't quite avoided yet, and that may be coming up in the future, is of course the whole concept of having a body, having a presence, having something which you can identify as separate to your mind. And this is why, again, I chose 20 years. We're probably going to still be sleeping in 20 years. We're going to have to think about hygiene. We're going to have to think about how we remain aware, whether that's through analytics, how we enhance our senses, do we enhance our senses? How are we going to rest and relax? That's one thing you never see in sci-fi, is people just kicking back, doing nothing. You might see it in Firefly, you might see it in some of the TV series. But in a book, if you're just reading about someone just sitting around, smoking a doob, having a beer, it's still going to happen in 20 years, I guarantee. It's a boring narrative, but it's like realistic. What kind of posture, what kind of position, what kind of body structures do we have in 20 years? What are we still doing for exercise? Part of my whole career, exercise science, is based on this concept that given that we don't run, jump, hunt things naturally, we're probably looking at a lifetime of having to go to the gym or do structured exercise, which just sounded ridiculous to people more than 200 years ago. But it's something that we've had to learn how to be able to do. What are people doing in 20 years to be able to keep themselves in shape? And nutrition, what are we still putting in the mouths? I'm not sure that we will have given up the pleasures of eating, let alone the fact that we might learn a lot more about nutrition, but we might just be more confused about nutrition in 20 years. And one of the practices that I'd like to be able to consider, because we're all kind of sci-fi fans, so I'm going to use other people's creations. And one of the practices that we can use to imagine what life must be like is this practice I call panning right. And I don't know if anyone recognizes the image. I don't know how well it comes up in the background of this one. Any takers? Can you see what that is? It is Blade Runner, it is Decker, it is Blade Runner Kitchen. And this is wherever I think pan right, I actually think the Blade Runner kind of scenario is, imagine one of your favorite science fiction, someone's done all the hard work to be able to create the universe that is there, the setting, the people, their hopes and dreams, and a little bit. Pick a point of the narrative where you think that there's going to be normality and natural kind of conclusion. And then, pan right, that's my left, but to you guys, am I right? What's happening across the hall? What's happening across the road? What is someone in that setting imagining? If that person was an author, if that person was a science fiction writer, what are they writing about? We borrowed the creation of something like Blade Runner, where we know kind of the motivations, we know there's off-world colonies, we know there's replicants. But does the person down the hallway from this gentleman, is he's having his life crisis, he's having his existential crisis, but what are they thinking? They don't know this guy from the soap, but they're in that same kind of universe. What hopes and dreams do they have? What are they creating for their own future? And you can do that with any number of science fiction. So, point one was that evolution will happen, development will happen, and that we will probably take along with us our science fiction creations. In order to be able to understand that second point though, will science fiction change along with our evolution? Let's look back in time and go, we might be able to identify some patterns in how and what science fiction is written based on the person's environment, situation, age, gender, something. That really does not come up well at this level. Here we get the slides. This is a great graphic to look at, and it kind of tracks the progress of science fiction all the way from mythico-religious fiction. It's actually modeled, the diagram is modeled on the concept of one of H.G. Wells' Martians. Sort of fluid-filled sacks that end up happening. From left to right, you end up going across through time from myths, legends, and religion. And we go through the golden age of sci-fi, we go through H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, through the Bradburys, the Asimovs in the middle. And we come to new space opera, cyberpunk, hard sci-fi, and then you have little branches off into mysteries, cowboy westerns. There's a lot of crossover in the literary world. Now, I purposely left off a whole bunch of authors on here because I do like to fuck with people. People get very beat up about the fact that I've missed out on their favorite authors. It's on purpose. Let's think back. So, I imagine that science fiction kind of had its origins only around the scientific revolution. Before that, it existed in the same kind of format, but we didn't have science, we had myth, we had religion. So it's still about what is available, what could be the future of whatever it is based on our current knowledge. So Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was one of our first kind of science fictions, which looked at, I have no way we have family notes there. That whole concept of, for that time that was science fiction. That was imagining, there was experiments that had gone on that Mary had seen where there was frog muscle or whatever it was electrocuted created. So she created this whole science fiction concept from it. And of course that's a concept of hubris, you create something but you don't give it love, you don't give it attention. It fades. Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, Hugo Gernsback, who created the first of these sort of science fiction pulp magazines, which ended up popularizing a lot of short stories. You could argue that that was also sort of the end of the reputation of science fiction in the literary world, because the pulps ended up creating this idea that was just badly written stuff in space. To Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, so Peter already mentioned that one. Čapek's RUR was the first mention of robots. I think he did that as it was close to a Polish word for slave, which we're talking about robots now, and the concept that if they're fueling our industrial society, they need slaves. All the way through, I'm not going to listen to all the detail because we've probably investigated them all, and it comes through to, say, cyberpunk or some of the modern science fiction. If I was a data scientist, if I was working in a machine learning company, I'd be looking for patterns within the data, and it's really a hot mess. There's no real correlation between what's happening for the person's existence and what's happening in their writing. Keep in mind one. It's kind of all over the shop though. There's no sort of definable patterns. Like 1920s, everyone was writing the exact same style of science fiction. They were imagining vast arrays of things. This is sort of our billion-year perspective versus what was happening 5 years in the future. So can we link the creations that are being out there to the creators that have created them? We're just going to do a quick run through the history of sci-fi. 2 points if anyone can recognize both of those characters there. They're two authors from very different ends of the spectrum. I want to say it's N.K. Jemisin, I should know because I actually put together the slide, and Jules Verne. So like about 100 and something years apart. Very different kind of people. So why does a science fiction creator create science fiction? What are the connections? Sometimes it's imagination. The concept we were talking about before is you can't imagine something that you don't have any syntax for. So if you can't find some sort of synthesis to be able to create it, or if you're not excited by something which is happening in the environment or in science at the moment, it's hard to be able to come up with something completely brand new. Sometimes they just want to have a social commentary or extrapolate on something that they see currently in their own future, in their own realities. And they want to have a bit of a social commentary about it if it was taken to its end. Sometimes they just want to imagine a different world. And you can imagine that for, say, some of the creators of the original Star Trek series, where we see a 1960s born future where there is racial equality, where there is people coming together, working towards common goals. That was part of the inspiration of science fiction through the 50s and 60s, was it allowed us to be able to imagine things. And you've got to imagine that any number of writers, whether they're on TV series or whether they're in books, either came from an LGBT background or from a